Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name's Maya. I'm a program assistant with Russell Sage.
Hi, my name is Stephen Klauser. I am a senior program officer at the foundation.
Before we get into it, just a couple of housekeeping notes. As you heard, this meeting's being recorded. It'll be posted on our website in the next couple of days, so you can go back and rewatch it as you work through your application. Please use the Q&A function for any questions, and then also please refrain from asking any sort of specific project-related questions during the presentation. If we don't get to your question, or if you do have a project-related question, our email is right here at programs@rsage.org, and we're happy to answer any questions that you might have. As far as our agenda today, we're going to go a little bit into the history of RSF and what we do, some of our funding priorities, and our funding mechanisms, and then we'll focus in on our core research grants for which we have an upcoming LOI deadline. We'll go over the deadlines for this year, the application materials, the review process, and then we'll have a chance to answer some questions on the call. So RSF is a private foundation. We were founded in 1907 by Margaret Olivia Sage with the mission of improving the social and living conditions in the United States. Until about 1944, we were a source of institutional support and information for private social agencies working on topics like social work, labor reform, housing, and public health. Since 1945, we've transitioned to funding strictly social science research with the goal of addressing questions that improve social and living conditions in the United States. And the main disciplines that we fund in are political science, sociology, economics, and psychology.
Great. So I will chat a little bit about the core program areas of the foundation. You can see there are asterisks on two of them. Those are the social, political, and economic inequality program and our future of work program are the programs that we are accepting LOIs for at our March deadline. But just as an overview, our behavioral science and decision making and context program really grew out of our pre-existing behavioral economics program, but we wanted to sort of show that we are also interested in the behavioral sciences outside of economics, but we're looking at sort of the decision-making processes, attitudes, behaviors, institutional practices. One thing I will say about our behavioral science program is we are interested in behavioral science questions that overlap with our other program areas. So we're not interested in just an example I always use is there's really cool data out there about umpire decision making in professional baseball. We're not super interested in that. We're interested in how behavioral science interacts with race, ethnicity, immigration, inequality, the labor market, etc. Um, a little bit more about our Future of Work program. Our Future of Work program is generally pretty broad. Anything to do with the labor market, laborers, worker power, that can be including but not limited to things like the effects of artificial intelligence, minimum wage levels, unionization, things like that. Our social, political, and economic inequality program is looking at sort of all of those different kinds of inequalities, the extent to which they affect outcomes. Those can be educational outcomes, labor market outcomes, political outcomes like uh, uh, the uh, the types of things that people engage with, and also anything to do with like economic mobility within, across generations, civic participation, things like that. And then finally, our race, ethnicity, and immigration program really looks at how the role of race, ethnicity, nativity, legal status, all of these sorts of things interact with each other and other social categories, and looking at those outcomes on the immigrant population, the U.S. born population, racial and ethnic minorities in the U.S., native born white population, etc. We're looking at both like within group and between group effects in that area. I do want to note we generally don't fund some things. First, studies that are focused on health outcomes, where health outcomes are the primary outcome of interest. We generally have left that to the devices of other larger funders who are interested in things like mortality or birth weights and things like that. Those are generally considered not something that RSF focuses on. We understand that sometimes studies have health outcomes among a list of many, many outcomes. So that's generally considered allowable as long as health outcomes are not the main one. If you have a question about where your project falls on that, we recommend you send us like an email to that programs at our stage address with like a little abstract, and we can try to give you some more information about whether the work you're doing is appropriate for RSF. That goes also for some other sort of educational processes, research on teacher outcomes, curriculum development, things like that. As I mentioned earlier, we are interested in some educational outcomes, so things like degree attainment, persistence in a degree. In general, I think a good rule of thumb is as we're interested in the educational outcomes, the closer you get to the labor market. So, sort of like high school degree completion, and through college and advanced degrees, etc. Um, we don't fund work focused on not outside of the US. There's some caveats to that where work cannot be done in the US because of various situations. Also, there's some work that happens outside of the US that is very relevant to the United States. A good example of this is we've funded some studies looking at folks who've been deported back in their country of origin. Obviously, they would not be back there but for the actions of the United States. So that would be in scope. Again, if you're not sure if your project fits, shoot us an email with a little abstract and we'll try to let you know. And then finally, there's some just general large categories that we don't usually support. These are just like institutional operational support grants, very specific and sort of program evaluations at like a very small level, things that are looking at animal studies, not other things like that. Generally, if your work is in the social sciences and based in the United States and in the areas that we have listed here, you're within scope. I do recommend that you look at all of the RFPs that we have available for these program areas on our website. We give example topics, example research questions. Those research questions are not meant to be all encompassing. They're just examples, but they are the types of things we're interested in. A good rule of thumb here is if you look at the folks you're citing and the folks you're citing have gotten RSF grants before, that's a good idea that you might be in the right realm and we might be interested in your work. You can go ahead to the next slide, Maya. We also have two sort of special initiatives that we want to draw your attention to. These are sort of junior varsity program areas that we are sort of trying to get more proposals in these areas. So the first one is immigration and immigrant integration. We are specifically looking at how immigrants integrate into to new societies, the impacts on the immigrants themselves, and the impacts on the native foreign population, the society that they have immigrated to, etc. That is not being accepted during this round. It will be accepted at our next LOI round. And then a very long-winded title, Promoting Educational Attainment and Economic Mobility Among Racially, Ethnically, and Economically Diverse Groups After the 2023 Supreme Court Decision to Ban Race-Conscious College Admissions Policies. So this is being accepted at this deadline, and it's essentially the affirmative action ended now what initiative, and that's being co-funded with three other foundations: the Hewlett Foundation, the Spencer Foundation, and the WT Grant Foundation. And there's also an RFP specifically for this on our website. I was gonna say, I don't think this is me.
No, it took me a second
Sure.
to unmute.
Sorry.
So we support work on these priorities through a couple of different funding mechanisms. This webinar is going to focus on our core research grants because that's the upcoming deadline that we have this spring. Our core research grants, we split into two categories. We have our trustee grants and our presidential grants. The difference between these has to do with how we make decisions internally. It doesn't really affect applicants at this phase of the process. For these, it's a two-stage application process. You submit an LOI, which is a short 4 pages, no budget required, just submit that and your CV. And then pending positive reviews, you'll be invited to submit a full proposal later on in the process. Um, you can request funds for what you need to do the research, including summer salary, research assistants, data access or collection costs, survey fees, etc. Um, the eligibility for this is just that you must have a PhD or a terminal degree in your field. There are no restrictions on nationality or institution. Um, and then grants, the difference between trustee and presidential grants is that uh, grants up to $75,000 can be approved by RSF's president, so it's more of an internal review process at the end phase, and then trustee grants go to our board of trustees and are voted on at one of 3 board meetings each year. In addition to our core research grants, we have 3 different types of early career grants. We have the pipeline grants competition, the causal research on the criminal justice system program, and our dissertation research grants program. These are all 1-year grants, 1-step application process where you submit everything that we need to make a decision at the time of application. There are different eligibility requirements for each program. The pipeline grants competition is open to non-tenured professors. The causal research on the criminal justice system program is open to tenure track assistant professors at U.S. institutions, and then our dissertation research grants program is open to ABD PhD students at U.S. institutions. The soonest deadline for this is the causal research on the criminal justice system deadline, which will be April 1st. We have a webinar on March 2nd that you can register for if you're interested in learning more about that program. In addition to our grants that we make, we offer 2 fellowships, the Visiting Scholars and Visiting Researchers Fellowships. The main difference between these 2 programs is that the VS Fellowship is a funded fellowship. The Visiting Researcher Fellowship is a shorter term unfunded fellowship. And these are residential fellowships at the foundation in New York City. You'll be part of an interdisciplinary cohort working through writing up your work and pre-publication. If you are interested, we also have an open access peer-reviewed interdisciplinary journal called the Russell Sage Foundation Journal of the Social Sciences. And to learn more about that and see current calls for papers, you can go to rsfjournal.org. The link is on your screen.
So I'll talk specifically about this current deadline that I'm sure all of you registered for this webinar anticipating this deadline. The 2 programs we are accepting are, again, the Social, Political, and Economic Inequality program and the Future of Work program, and then also the initiative on the 2023 Supreme Court decision to ban race-conscious admissions. So these research grants are 1 or 2-year grants of up to $200,000. And we rotate what programs are available each schedule. So for the next deadline, which will be in July, we will accept our race, ethnicity, immigration program, our behavioral science and decision-making program, and the immigrant integration special initiative. And so I do want to talk a little bit. I noticed that there was a question about if we had any guidance about if your project sits at the intersection of 2 different programs, how do you pick which program to go to? I think a good way to sort of determine that is to, again, go look at the RFPs for the programs and sort of see which one. But I do want to recognize that these are big buckets for program areas. And there's obviously, for example, a lot of inequality that has to do with race, ethnicity, and immigration status. So if you're unsure, you can feel free to email us and we can try to give you some guidance. But I also want to let you know that it's not a super big deal if you're way off. The worst thing that we would do is we would hold it to the next deadline when we are actually accepting that program. We wouldn't necessarily we often sort of recognize that projects are sitting at the intersection of 2 different program areas, and it's sort of sometimes it's sort of just like a vibe space. We feel like it goes in this one more than it goes into another one, and I would say we don't want it to be too stressful for you. It's generally going to be a good thing if you think your thing if your project falls in multiple areas, it means you might be a better fit for the work at the foundation. And we are a small team here. We work across the different program areas. And there's not a I would say there is some siloing, but it's not super. We do work across program areas together pretty well. So I think just a simple email to us will be the best way to figure that out. So this is a little bit more details about the actual requirements for this LOI deadline. We will have the proposal narrative that is going to be sort of the pre-proposal narrative, if you want to call it that, for the 4-page LOI, which you can really think of as sort of like a mini proposal. We're going to want to see a lot of information about your research design. We're going to want to see sort of like a lit review and how you situate yourself in the literature and what your contribution is going to be, and other things like that. I do have some sort of like common pitfalls that people maybe should be aware of, especially if you're used to applying to other places that are not the Russell Sage Foundation, for example, like NSF or something like that. We see a lot of proposals come into us that are really just sort of copied and pasted from submissions to other funders. And I want to encourage you to really sort of customize this to RSF. That'll really strengthen your chances of getting through our sort of like desk reject process. Your first filter is going to be RSF staff, and the best way to think about us is as sort of like journal editors. We're generalists. We read across the program areas, across the topics, across the disciplines, across various methodologies, data sources, etc. And so we're judging this for, is this a good fit for the foundation? Is this project at the right stage, right? Like we'll occasionally get projects that are too preliminary, like, oh, you haven't really thought through your research design fully. We'll also get projects that are sort of too far done. This is already done. They don't need RSF money. They've already done the work. So you want to sort of figure out, is this the right stage? Having things like proof of concept or pilot data, and you just need RSF funding to scale up, that's a really good stage. But no matter what it is, we want to see a very well-developed research design. And it's a good rule of thumb to sort of have maybe 50% of the LOI be dedicated to your research design. I'll say there are a lot of sections that are often required in other applications that we don't require, and if you include them, you're just having an opportunity. You're taking away space that you could be used for other things. So that includes things like NSF used to require a section on broader impacts. We don't require that. We don't require a section on investigator qualifications. We don't expect a lot of information on the budget at this stage. You can often get away with one sentence on the budget saying, I am requesting $100,000 for research assistants, summer salary, and participant incentives, period. And that would be sufficient at the LOI stage. We just want to sort of have an estimate and an example of the types of things that you're going to spend the money on. And if we invite you to a full proposal, we'll then want the additional details for that budget. But we are going to want to see the research design. I feel like I'm going to repeat myself a lot here, but we want you to describe the data, the methods, the analytic plan, and why they are appropriate to answer the research questions that you're posing. And we really want you to get into the weeds on that. I do want to remind folks that RSF is an interdisciplinary funders, and it's possible that reviewers for your application may not be limited to your field. So if you give us a literature review that is narrowly focused on your subfield in one area, it may not be as competitive as one that cites widely and demonstrates that you have a broad understanding of the topic. And then finally, I would sort of encourage you to anticipate reviewer questions and get ahead of their concerns. That means like recognizing the weaknesses in your research design and saying, yes, this is a limitation, but here's why this is still the right way to go about this. You want to and that can be for many reasons, because of data limitations, or you have to start somewhere. This is a good place to start, and then maybe in future work we can scale up. But what you want to do is anticipate that reviewers are going to see those concerns, and then if you show that you have a good handle on this, that really gives us confidence that if we give you a grant, that you will be able to handle any sort of hiccups that happen along the way. Yeah, that's it for this for me. So this is a sort of a breakdown of how the two-stage review looks. You submit the LOI, it goes through that internal staff review I mentioned, which is a desk reject sort of stage, and then it goes out for external peer review. I think one thing that's really important to understand about RSF's peer review process, besides it just being interdisciplinary, is that it's not a standing panel like an NSF style panel where they read all of them and then rank them or something like that. What we are doing is we are trying to get you very targeted feedback. So hopefully the reviewers that we recruit are going to be well matched to the research topic you're posing, as well as the methodology that you're using. For example, if you're proposing survey research, we're going to send it to a survey researcher or something like that. We want it to be very well targeted, and so that I think that means that when you're putting together your research design section of your LOI, you can feel free to get really nerdy with it and get really into the weeds and not be worried about overwhelming a reviewer or something like that. We do want to see all of those details about why you chose this selection method for your interviews or why this is the right subgroup to really lean into, or why this if you I don't know why you picked these three cities for your design, et cetera, et cetera. We want to get really into those details, and you should be justifying all of those decisions. If the peer review goes well, if those reviewers give us positive reviews, we will invite you to submit a full proposal. That full proposal will generally give you about a month deadline. So that means you should have a decision on your LOI by mid-April. And then in that full proposal, it's longer. I think it's 10 pages instead of the 4 pages. You can respond to those reviewer comments. All full proposals go out for external review. And yeah, Maya, I think that's all I really have to say about this, other than to note the timing at the bottom here, which is that LOI is submitted at this deadline. The decisions will be made at our November board meeting. So start dates for these projects can generally be assumed to be around January 2027.
Yeah. Um, just to reiterate, some of the requirements for the proposal submission, the invitations to submit a full proposal will go out sometime in May, of this year. In addition to the proposal, you'll be asked to respond to the peer reviewers that gave you comments. And at this point, you'll be asked to submit a full budget and a budget narrative. The budget does need to be on RSF's template, which you can find on our website, or it'll also be emailed to you. In addition to this, we want the CVs of your co-PIs if you have any. And then if you're conducting survey research, we hope that you will get 2 quotes from 2 different survey firms, and just give us a little bit of an explanation of why you've chosen the one that you're going with. There's no page limit to the review response memo, so you can go as in depth as you feel you need to, and we hope that you do engage seriously with the reviewers' concerns, or any feedback or questions that they have, because your proposal will ideally, we try to recruit the same set of reviewers as reviewed the LOI for the proposal, so it'll be going back to the same people. As far as these post-approval materials, if you have these at the time of that the proposal is due, that's great. It helps demonstrate the feasibility of your project if you have your IRB approval, or if you have a confirmation of data access or a memorandum of understanding or something. But it's not required for proposal submission. If the grant is approved, we'll just make the funding contingent on receiving those materials. And then just an additional note about references, charts, figures, survey, or interview guides. You can have a 1-page appendix for charts, tables, figures. Surveys and interview guides are not limited by a page limit. So if you can give us the full set of questions you're planning to ask or something like that, that's really helpful for reviewers to look at and for us to see as well. Once you submit your full proposal, it'll go back out for external peer review. And we ask a lot of the same questions that we ask at the letter of inquiry stage, where we're asking the reviewers to comment on the research design, the methodology, the analytic plan, and the theory and structure of the work. If those reviews are positive, we'll ask you to respond again to reviewer comments, at which point the sort of tree splits between our presidential and our trustee grants, trustee level grants, which are between 75,000 and 200,000, are reviewed by RSF's advisory committee and then recommended to the Board of Trustees for approval. Um, Presidential level grants below 75,000 are reviewed internally by our team and go to the president for approval. And again, the earliest start date for this March deadline can be January 2027 or later. And that's it from us for today. Some useful links for you before we get into Q&A. Our website, russellsage.org. Questions can go to programs@rsage.org. To submit an application, we require that you create an account in Flux. There's a QR code for that. It's rsf.flux.io. Please create your account ideally a week before the deadline or earlier, so you can get started. And because we process those manually, so there can be a bit of a backlog around deadlines. And then if you want to be kept in the loop about upcoming deadlines, new programs, announcements, you can sign up for our email newsletter via this QR code or this link.
Great. I think I want to start jumping in and answering
Yeah.
some of the questions that have popped up. So I'll start basically in order. So we have a question about whether salary support can be requested for the academic year. That depends on the situation. That's mostly a case-by-case basis. If you are a research professor or a professor who is on soft money and something like that, we generally do support salary support in those ways. If you are not, if you're like a tenure track professor who has teaching obligations, but you want academic year salary support, it would depend on like the timeliness of the project or why it had to happen. So that's a sort of an it depends. We have a question about how the budget amount does the budget amount in the LOI determine whether the grant is a trustee or presidential grant? That's the main thing that we use. The only difference between the presidential grants and the trustee grants is the dollar amount, and then that will track you into either requiring eventual board of trustees approval or being an internal decision. But they generally go through the same review process up until that fine. It's just that trustee grants have one additional step that they have to be approved by the full board of trustees. Oh, I guess this question about how I said out loud. Yes, I did say that you don't need a lot of information on PI qualifications, and actually, we are in the processes of editing the language on our website. I think the website still has the old language. I assure you, you will not be rejected because you did not include a section on LOI or on investigator qualifications. And I hope that website will be up. We've approved the language internally and it is going to our communications department. So it should be up soon with an update, but please disregard that requirement for LOIs. Another question about budget. Yes, we do not hold you to the budget amount that you list in the LOI when you submit the full proposal. We're generally just looking for sort of a estimate at the back of the envelope number at the LOI stage. And then when you put together a full budget at the proposal stage, you will have a line item budget in Excel, and then you will get a real number. As long as you are not like way off, if you're like an order of magnitude off, that would be cause for concern. But as long as you're not way off, that's okay. And oftentimes we see budgets revised in response to reviewer comments where reviewers are like, hey, the scope of this project should be expanded. And as a result, the cost would go up. So that would be a justifiable reason for a significant increase or something like that. But in general, we're using the LOI number as an estimate, and then we understand that it's going to change in the future.
One more note on that is just if you're submitting at the presidential level, the proposal invitation will say that you can request up to 75,000. If you're submitting above that, it'll say you can request up to 200,000. So we do try to keep it consistent between the buckets. The main issue or difference that we have there is that we don't allow indirect costs on our presidential grants. So that can cause some changes to the amount if you're calculating your presidential grant with indirect costs included, and then you go and fill out our budget template, and it doesn't allow indirects on that.
There's a question about method limitations to the proposals. Are data science computational methods equally accepted as ethnographic and qualitative methods? Yeah, we actually fund across all manner of mixed methods projects, qualitative work with like interviews, ethnographies, survey research, big data sets being analyzed. All like there's a whole large number of different methods that we accept. It's there, and I would say I don't. We might be accused of having a bias in one way or another, but I would hope that we don't have a very strong bias against any of the different methods. Um, there's another question about our publication clause. So RSF does have a book publishing. We are a publisher, and we generally reserve the right to publish work. But in this case, that this question asker has detailed here, they already have a publication plan. I don't know if that's basically if you have a contract signed already with another publisher, then we generally you're released from that requirement. And on occasion, our publications director will grant waivers to RSF's right of first refusal. That would be a sort of like a discussion with our director of publications at a future point. And what I would advise is I would not let concerns about that prevent you from submitting an LOI. That's something that can be negotiated in the future. I've seen it. I don't know a lot of the details on that because we don't sit in that. If you're interested, I can connect. You shoot us an email at this programs at RSH email address, and we can connect you with our publications director, and you can have a conversation before you submit if you would like. There's a question about how technical of a language the research design section should be. I would say you can feel free to get really, really technical. Depending on the type of project, we have people include like the formulas and LaTeX are included in it. You can get pretty jargony. I would assume that the external reviewers are going to be familiar with the language that you're using, and you should feel comfortable doing that.
We've got a couple questions about appendices, what can and can't be included at the LOI and the proposal stage. If you have an interview guide to include or a survey at the LOI stage, you're welcome to include that. That's totally fine. So yes, you can include an appendix with your LOI. We just ask that if it's going to be charts, tables, figures, that's limited to one page. If it's a longer data collection instrument, that's acceptable as well. One last question on this is about survey firms in the full proposal. That's for your budget justification. If you are contracting with, I don't know, Prolific, for example, and you've decided to run your survey through Prolific, we'd ask that you have a quote from Prolific and you have a quote from another company, and you give us a little bit of an explanation about why you're choosing Prolific, be it cost, they're better at doing the work that you want them to do for your project or something like that. If you're going out and interviewing people or collecting data, you don't need to get multiple quotes for that because that doesn't make sense.
I would note
Yeah.
that we do generally ask that if you are compensating respondents that they be responded at or that they be compensated at the equivalent of, I believe it's $15 an hour. So if your survey
Yeah, or
takes
minimum wage in the state,
but if your
whichever is
survey,
higher. Yeah,
whichever is higher,
yeah,
if your survey takes 10 minutes, then it's 1/6 of that should be the minimum for compensation per respondent or something like that.
yeah.
Um, there's a question about what disciplines we accept proposals or applications from. We don't limit it to the general social sciences. We've accepted proposals and funded proposals from the humanities. I know there's a number of historians who've been supported by us, other sort of fields like communications and things like that. In general, the proposals that we see are from folks outside of the social sciences are using social science methods or asking social science related questions. Um, but we don't really judge based on the discipline of the PI. Is not how we're sorting that. There's a question about the July LOI deadline and when proposals would start. So July LOIs for our race ethnicity program and our behavioral science program would be funded at our March 2027 meeting. So that means they could generally start a little, maybe a month or two after that. And Maya, do you know when the full proposal is due for that? I don't currently know
End
that.
of October.
End of October.
Um,
So you would get a
yeah,
decision in late September and have them again.
yeah.
We generally shoot for about a month for you to put together the full proposals. Um,
For this question about if the COPI and PI can be included, sure, you're welcome. I mean, there will be a section for on the application form in Flux to list the PI and the COPI. And you're welcome to include the CVs. Only one person can submit the application, and we prefer that we require that that be the PI on the grant. But for purposes of publication or anything like that, um, you're welcome to change the order between the PI and the co-PI there. But only one person will be able to have access on the online website Flux to make any edits or submit the application themselves. So whoever is better at responding to emails is probably the person to choose for that between you and your co-PI.
so there's a question about the level of detail, about like pilot data analysis in the LOI versus the full proposal. I would say it depends on what you have and where you are at the time of the deadline. It's generally a good idea to show you what you have. If you have some preliminary analysis, that's great. But if you don't and you just have like, I don't know, like frequency tables, even something like that is good to show us because it does show us that things have started and you've gotten things moving. Um, I would say the types of things that we consider too preliminary are like sometimes we get applications where someone's like, I'm interested in this and I'm going to start in the first month after I get the grant, I'm going to do a literature review or something like that. Or I'm going to develop a survey instrument. And it's like, no, we'd rather see that you've already developed and pre-tested the survey instrument. Or maybe you've done some pilot interviews if it's a qualitative project. We want to see that there's been some pre-testing of whatever you're going to do. But again, we're sort of flexible with that, but what we consider too preliminary is often stuff where it's just this is still a concept paper. It doesn't really have a fully fleshed out research design. There's a question about our causal research and criminal justice program. We we would allow qualitative methods as long as they are partnered with a causal research design. So it could be like you're doing an RCT and you also have a qualitative part to that where you're interviewing some of the folks or something like that. But if it was a purely qualitative project, that we would not consider that a causal research design. We're generally considering things like um, instrumental variables, regression discontinuity, diff and diff, these sorts of primarily quantitative studies. Again, as this question asker notes, the co-funder Arnold Ventures is primarily focused on causal research. But again, we will accept qualitative methods as part of a larger research design, but if it was the only method, then no. Okay, there's a question about how many projects or experiments should really be included in an LOI. This is largely because when you start to describe many different studies in a single LOI, you can't really give a lot of details about any single one of them. So we really think that you should limit it to projects that are if there are multiple parts to it, like this one where it's a mixed method study, that's okay because it's still sort of answering the same broad question. But if it's something like I think this is maybe primarily a thing for psychology studies where we get something where it describes 8 different studies and they're each very, very short or something like that. And I would try to limit that number a little bit so that you can give us the level of details or give us a lot of details on the initial study and then the subsequent studies that come out of that maybe give us fewer details. But you want to make sure that you at least have an amount of detail in the research design that we can have something to analyze. Um,
This last question about causal design versus descriptive design for the social, political, and economic inequality call that for our core programs and pretty much for every program except for the causal research on the criminal justice system program, we don't have a preference for quantitative or qualitative design.
and even quantitative stuff with descriptive
Yeah,
designs is
yeah,
acceptable. Like all of those are fine.
yeah, totally.
Yeah, so sorry that was a confusing. This has led to another couple questions. I see the the qualitative the limitation to causal research designs is literally only for our causal research and criminal justice program. Across all of our other programs, we do not limit the types of methods, the types of that you use. So apologies for that confusion. I had hoped we had headed a lot of that off by putting it in the title of that program, but it's just the causal research in criminal justice is the only program at RSF where we have a limitation to the types of research designs that we will accept.
And
Um,
for more information on that, please register for our CRCJ webinar, which will be all the questions that you might have about that program, which is going to be on March 2nd, and you can find the link for that on our website. I will answer one of that, which is that my understanding is that you must be a tenure track assistant professor
yes, currently,
to be eligible for that program. Um, on indirect costs, this all matters only at the proposal stage, except for, I guess, as you're putting together your budget estimate. Um, we allow indirect costs on trustee level grants over $75,000, capped at $200,000. Only one organization can collect indirect costs. So if there's a subcontract, the uh, main institution can collect indirects only on the portion of funds that will be spent at that institution. And then the secondary institution, the subcontract institution, can collect indirects on the portion of the funds that will be spent at that institution. So that'll all be handled by automatically by our budget template. And then because you're making a payment to a survey firm, the you can't collect indirect costs on that payment itself because there aren't the work isn't being done by the university itself. Um, if that makes sense. Um, in terms of the number of proposals that are funded, it really varies by funding cycle, by the number of applications that we get. Um, our funding rate is hovering in the 8 or 9% range. Um, but it varies a lot, and we're getting a lot more applications these days, just due to the sort of national funding situation. So things are a little bit up in the air. Yeah, I answered a question about presidential grants, early career grants, sorry, presidential grants, trustee grants, and early career faculty. We do have early career scholars who apply for trustee grants and are successful. But we the presidential grant has a slightly higher funding rate just because it doesn't have the additional hurdle of clearing, going into, and being voted on by the Board of Trustees. So generally, if you're applying to the foundation for the first time, as a junior scholar, and you're not eligible for one of our pipeline grants, or your project needs additional has a larger budget than that, we generally would recommend that you apply for a presidential grant, just because you have a higher chance of success. But obviously, if your budget is larger than that, you can
right.
apply for a
I would
trustee.
recommend if the project requires a much larger budget than $75,000, you should ask for the amount of money that you need to do the
Yes,
project
yes.
because you don't want to be stuck getting a grant where you can then not have enough resources to do what you actually want to do. But I will say there's a lot of bunching around 75K because if you do your back of the envelope calculation, it comes to like $85,000. that you're going to be more successful at the $75,000 rate, and maybe you
Hmm.
can figure something else out. Also, with the lack of indirects at the 75K level, so there's also some of that calculation going on. I want to address this last question that's still in the queue about whether RSF funds work that uses existing publicly available data sets. I will say, in general, if you are doing what we would call a sort of like routine analysis of a publicly available data set, like if you're running regressions on the PSID or the ACS or something like that, we aren't super interested in that. If you are doing something with restricted sections of those data sets, or if you are combining those data sets with some other data, or something like that, if you're doing something a little bit more original, a little bit more creative, then we could be interested again. And this is a great example of something that you can email us about, and we can try to give you some more clarity about. If you say, "Hey, I'm using these restricted sections of these data sets or these microdata, and I'm also combining it with this other thing that I'm doing, and here's what I'm trying to do," we can maybe we can talk about that. Um, there's a question. Maya, are you looking up the link for the criminal
I was
justice
going to
webinar?
ask you to do that because I'm
Okay.
screen sharing. If
Oh,
you can
sure.
go find it,
I'll go find that, and then
but we will
you can answer some of the other
get you the link
questions.
for that. Um, just going in order of these questions. Yeah, a project that's funded by an early career grant can definitely be funded later by a core grant. We have projects that evolve from the pipeline grants into our core research grants. And also, yes, to if you have funding from other grants, we'll ask you what your pending and confirmed funding is, and we'll ask you about what parts of the project those co-funders will support. Um, on this question about a junior faculty member in the early career grant, yes, you can apply as part of a team with a mid-career or senior scholar, but they won't be eligible to request funding in terms of salary support on the project. So the funds from the grant itself can only go, in terms of salary support, can only go to junior faculty. Um, the budget language on our website is correct. So non-tenure track PIs can request up to $20,000 a year, and tenure track PIs can request up to $15,000 a year. Um, that section of our website, the language is correct. In terms of on social media data, it depends. I'd suggest sending us an email. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, if you
I
want to
think
jump in, Stephen.
yeah, it's there's a but it I guess social media is a hard thing to define, but if you're like scraping Twitter data or something like that, we'd have a lot of questions about the sample and about bots
Hmm.
and about things like that. This doesn't mean that it can't be funded or won't be funded. We wouldn't dismiss it out of hand, but you would have to really justify why that is the right data to use and address all of those sorts of concerns. I guess it sort of also depends on the research question. Like if you're studying social media and you're using social media data, that makes a lot of sense. But if you're trying to use Twitter data to explain what society at large is doing, I'm going to be I'll admit to being skeptical about whether that's a representative sample or not. But yeah, so I wouldn't consider that like a publicly available data set, and as much as we would things that are put out like the big like I said, I think the ACS, the PSID, like those sorts of publicly available data sets that are just sort of freely available for download. Yes, there will be another webinar for the July LOI date. We tend to do these webinars about 1 month ahead of time. I encourage you to sign up for our newsletter. We will all of these webinars are announced in our newsletter. Um, and there's a question here about if you don't get accepted for this, can you resubmit as a pipeline grant or another grant? As yes, so we don't have limitations on the number of times you can submit to us. I will say if you get rejected um, uh, without comments, it might be a good reason to sort of email us and say, hey, is this because this isn't a topic RSF is interested in and maybe it's not worth submitting again? If you get rejected with reviewer comments and you take those comments in and you think you can address those reviewer concerns, and you turn it into a stronger submission the next time around, that's to us is the process working, and we encourage that. We see the peer review process as a sometimes it takes a few tries, and it's quite common for us to see resubmissions be successful. That's not a rare occurrence.
I think questions have slowed down, so maybe we call it at this point. Again, any questions that you think of later, or didn't want to say on the Zoom, you can email us at programs@rsage.org.
Maya
Um,
did allude earlier to how you should register earlier for the Flux account because people do procrastinate and it gets bogged down the closer you are to the deadline. I will say that also goes for questions. The closer you get to the deadline, the more questions we are receiving. So if you send us an email in the next couple of weeks, we'll have time to respond to it. But if you send us an email the day before the deadline, you're going to be one amongst many, many, many emails that are burying our inboxes, and you're going to get a quick reply, if anything. So, yeah, I do encourage you to try to fight against that tendency of academics to procrastinate, even though I know it's very hard. But we appreciate it, and I think you would also maybe save your stress levels a little bit.
uh, Last couple of questions. Yes, the recording will be available. Consider the website up to date at this point. Don't wait for it to um, don't wait for any changes or expect any changes. We'll make any edits we make will be clarifying at this point. Um, the funding limitations on salary vary across our grant types, and I'd look closely at the budget section of our website, or send us an email if you have a specific question. Um, okay, I think that's it. Thank you so much, everyone. Best of luck as you put together your applications. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
I'll